Viewpoint is a news interview series presented in the belief that close journalistic scrutiny of civic officials is in the public interest. Tonight's program is Viewpoint Dan White. For Channel 6, here's reporter Jerry Burns.
Our guest tonight is Supervisor Dan White, a former policeman, a former fireman, and now, since January, a member of the Board of Supervisors representing the 8th District, which includes the Portola District, the Crocker Amazon, the Outer Mission, Visitation Valley. Supervisor White, you're one of those rare political individuals who's not a lawyer, who's never been in politics before, just a regular guy who suddenly found himself a member of the Board of Supervisors. After a month and a half of it, are you glad you did it?
Well, I find it very fascinating, very interesting. People ask me, are you having fun? And that's the furthest thing from my mind. I could never describe it as fun, but it's quite an education. It's a learning process, which I'm going through now, but it's also a very fascinating insight to what really makes our city move and our government move. And
you've seen the board operate in the days before district elections. When you were a policeman or fireman, I know you came to board meetings and you watched them operate. Can you perceive any difference in operation under the new district system?
What I can perceive is what I feel that a lot of the people in San Francisco wanted was a better working procedure and working together, a better togetherness of the board members themselves. We disagree on many different issues, but we're not disagreeable. See? And that's very important, I feel. To be very factual, you know, there's basic differences, political, I'll get it, political opinions, let's say, a broad scale, one to the other, let's say between Quentin Kopp and Carol Ruth Silver. But there hasn't been, I haven't seen it as yet, a real negative approach to any issues one or the other may be trying to pursue.
You haven't been really a supervisor long enough, I think, for most of the general public to form an opinion as to where Dan White is politically. Though there is the suspicion that by being an ex-policeman and forced to be a retired fireman, and now being chairman of the Police, Fire, and Safety Committee of the board, that you're probably a conservative politically and a law and order guy. Is that a fair description?
Well, I'm definitely a law and order. I campaign very hard on what I consider to be the #1 priority, not only for my district, but for San Francisco, and that is to make this a safe city. I was on a few news broadcasts a couple of weeks ago and clearly stated what I feel has not been stated by our public officials, and that is San Francisco is not a safe city. And it is not in reflection on the San Francisco Police Department, but it's a reflection on, I feel, public officials' willingness to identify the fact that the citizens of San Francisco are not safe. Once we admit that, we can deal with the problems, which many of the problems revolve around the fact that the San Francisco Police Department is sorely understaffed. And since 1975, they have 250 fewer patrolmen in the district stations, which are walking the street or driving the patrol cars, protecting the citizens of San Francisco. Their equipment is poorly maintained because of lack of funding. These facts have to be brought out, and the problem has to be dealt with.
Well, then I take it that you're in favor of the supervisors granting all the millions of extra dollars the police commission wants this year to finance the hiring of additional officers and civilian personnel to release officers from desk duty to go on the street. You're in favor of granting all the money that the commission wants?
I'm not in favor of granting all the money, because I'm sure there are some areas of the police budget that are not desperately needed. But what I consider desperate needs are the needs that you just mentioned. The manpower shortage. We'll have to pay for those new police personnel. The equipment shortage. And I would say that the majority of the police budget has to be adopted and should be adopted for the safety of our citizens.
Now that'll mean a tax increase unless somebody else's budget is cut. Is that what we're looking at?
Well, it's always ideal if you can save money in one area and help another area. I don't see that happening initially. It possibly could be a tax increase, but I think, personally, I'll go on record for saying this, that people are tired of being subjected to the criminal element in San Francisco, and I feel if they were guaranteed, which Chief Gaines has said, that he will make these new patrolmen into task forces, which will be in the neighborhoods. If the people receive this guarantee, they would be willing to pay. You have to pay for those police services.
After the outbreak of hoodlum violence on San Bruno Avenue, I guess it was, in the month of January, you were quoted widely as calling for citizens to band together to protect themselves. Some of your critics said it sounded like you were calling for vigilante groups to be formed, practically, armed vigilantes, lynchings in the street, whatever you want. Is that really what you want to see?
No, it isn't. We have to be very realistic. The news media thrives on sensationalism, and vigilantes sounds, real great. That's not what I intended. What I intended was to, number one, point out that we have to support and bolster up our number one defense, which is the police department. If that isn't done, or even if it is done, we still have to, the police has to rely, and they want to work with the citizens in the various neighborhoods. A point I brought out, which I think is so important, is you have to, the news media has to be able to identify, who is actually perpetrating these crimes, because a citizen may have seen an assailant or a thief prior to the crime and can help the police by saying, well, geez, a half hour earlier he was on my block, and maybe figure out where this person may come from. But the newspapers, using the newspapers for example, and possibly the TV news, they are reluctant. There are many reasons for it, but I feel I don't agree with them, to identify who is perpetrating these crimes, a full identification, not only...
What do you mean by that? I assume you mean race.
Well,
Because
race
the
is
news media
included, but
frequently
not...
leaves the race out in a thing like that for a variety of reasons. Is that what you mean? And if not, what else is
Well,
there?
for what I mean is a full description. If the fellow was wearing a red jacket, blue pants, he's 5'8", 20 years old, and he's Chinese, or he's Caucasian, or he's black, that should be printed. Because the description, now we had 5 elderly people assaulted within a short span of time, a few hours' time, and the only description that came out was youths between the ages of 14 and 18, 3 youths. Well, I'd venture to say there's 30,000 youths in this city that fit that description. But if there was a complete, or as complete as they could have made it, description, I'm sure there's citizens in that neighborhood that saw these people hanging around prior to the committing of these crimes.
And this would be for every crime, or just major crimes, or just crimes of violence?
Well, I think, once again, we have to take direction from the police department. I'm sure there are some cases that they don't want the criminal identified as far as investigation to complete a case. But once again, I feel that with programs like Project SAFE, we have to get together with the community and the police department, working in conjunction. The police can't do it by themselves, and obviously the citizens are unable to protect themselves. But working together, I think we can solve a lot of the problems.
Well, it isn't clear to me still what you meant by citizens gathering together. Did you mean citizens forming posses of 10 people to patrol their own streets?
Okay, we'll deal with the crime issue. My idea initially was not particularly just related to crime. It's what I've been working on since I was elected. There are 5 major areas in my district, and I'm having 9 people from each of these areas who are more or less stalwarts in the community, very respected in the community, to act as a district advisory council. For any problem that crops up in the district, they would, let's say, come from the Portla district to the Crocker-Amazon to support a problem that in the past would just be Crocker-Amazon's problem. But what I'm trying to build is a feeling out there that we're all in this together, whatever the problem may be, a closing of a health center, transferring of school children, or whatever, you see. Now, in the crime end of it, what I would like to see, and what I think should be done with direction by the police department, is citizens watching out on their various blocks and throughout their neighborhoods, actually on a regular basis, a scheduled regular basis, that they would go around in their cars, to the neighbors, just to look, because many of these crimes, especially these juvenile crimes, are opportunistic crimes. And the thing is, if you narrow down and lessen the opportunities, then you're going to consequently lower the crime.
Well, let's get some of the rumors out of the way. Do you want these citizens to be armed?
Oh, no, by no means.
Do you want them to attempt to apprehend people, or just merely to report suspicious characters to police officers?
I think it would be up to the discretion of the people who were involved at the time. If they see an old woman being beaten and her purse being stolen, I have no qualms about apprehending the person or trying to apprehend the persons who are doing it. See?
All right, let's, leaving street crime for a second, but staying in the area of police services, what's your attitude towards Chief Gain?
My personal attitude is, my dealings with him, I find him very good to deal with. I realize there's a morale problem in the police department. For whatever reasons, there has been a rift between the men and Chief Gaines. But what I've done, as I'm in the process now of going around to every police station, every bureau in the police department, and speaking personally to the men and women of the police department to find out how I can help them as a supervisor. I've spoken to Chief Gaines on how I can help him to show the people in the police department, show the citizens that you have to bring about a rapport that is missing between the communities and the police department. I saw that deteriorate when I was a policeman, the lack of confidence in the police department. There are many reasons for it. And let's face it, I think an issue that rubs a lot of people the wrong way is the fact that many of the policemen and firemen don't live in San Francisco. That's always thrown up, you know, that, well, they don't even care about us, they don't live here. And I think there's some justification in that attitude from the people.
Do you think they should be required to live here or as close as the law will allow?
I personally think that other than the people that have been allowed to move out already, you know, I mean, the courts allowed them to move out. I would never advocate bringing back the people who have been allowed to move out. But I think as soon as we can, however we can, I would like to see every city employee reside in San Francisco, not only the police and firemen.
One of the causes, as you may recall, of maybe the public's disillusionment with its uniformed forces was the strike in 1975. I remember what the streets felt like in those days. It was pretty awful. Do you support in principle the idea that policemen and firemen should have the right to strike?
No, unequivocally no. Now my position, which you haven't asked, but which I will state because at the time I was a fireman, and at the time I was on strike, okay, because I liked, and I'm sure people realize this, there had never been a police and fireman strike. 90% of those men had never been involved, did not realize the consequences of a strike, okay. I would venture to say that now it would be highly impossible or improbable, even though the clause now says that they'll be automatically fired. If that wasn't even in there, it would be very, very difficult to convince those policemen or firemen to strike again. They realize a lot of mistakes were made, but I'd like to say that the public was never fully aware of what caused that strike by the Board of Supervisors at the time. The men themselves were not dealt with fairly, and they were very resentful of that.
But you think the experience was so, whatever you want to characterize it as, awful for the people who did strike to see the public's reaction, that regardless of the future disagreements over salaries or fringe benefits, that they wouldn't strike again?
I definitely agree, you know, feel that way, because, once again, I'd like to state that the majority of these people had never been involved in a strike, and life is a learning process. You know, you learn by your mistakes or you learn by your involvements, and this was very much a learning procedure and process for these people, myself included. And I don't feel that it's purely just because of the resentment felt by the public. It's that they realize that there are better ways, even if you don't get or what you've hoped to accomplish at the time. If you don't accomplish that, there are better ways than a strike to go about it.
Are you in favor of binding arbitration to settle disputes between the city and uniformed forces?
I think it's long overdue, yeah. It's
even though that is granting your powers as an elected official to an unelected third party, the arbitrator?
Well, I like to feel that as a supervisor, it is my job, my responsibility with the fellow members of the board to solve as many of these contract disputes as we can. That is my responsibility. I don't believe in pushing it off on the electorate or in hiring other people to do it, but being realistic, we have to realize that dealing with so many contracts and being involved in so many negotiations, there are going to be impasses where a third party who is completely objective can come in and render a decision. That's being very practical, and I think it's long overdue.
As a former policeman and fireman, do you feel that you can, in all fairness, cast a vote this year and in as many years as you're a supervisor, on police and fire wages?
Well, I have no control over them, as you know, Jerry, because of Proposition D, which made the salaries automatic. But people ask me this question many times, and I think being a policeman and fireman, it would be very difficult for anyone coming from those departments to try to put one over on me. I think I'm in an excellent position because I've experienced the needs and the involvement of the police and firemen. And so I can look with an experienced eye on the proposals that are coming before me. So I think it's definitely a plus for the board and a plus for the people of San Francisco.
What's your feeling about Supervisor Feinstein's proposal to eliminate the sheriff's office and set up a marshal's office to handle the courts and to administer the jails?
I haven't investigated it thoroughly. I've spoken to Diane only briefly on the proposal. My main consideration at all times is what is best for the city of San Francisco. If there is a financial savings, if there's an efficiency factor that is greater, that could be greater under a new system, then I would support it. You see.
When you were a policeman, did you form any opinion about the way the sheriff's department ran the jails? I know there was a lot of competition between the police department, which ran city prison, and the sheriff's department, which ran county jail.
I think there's always been a problem because of the uniqueness of the city and county of San Francisco. The sheriff's department in other counties has full police effectiveness. They arrest, they patrol, they serve warrants and many such things. This is not true of our department. It hasn't been true because of the uniqueness of being both a city and a county. And this is what I think President Feinstein is looking at, that the sheriff's department is not really functioning as a true intended sheriff's department. And I feel this has hurt the sheriff's department in the past, and if this is a way that we can alleviate this and have a more effective force, be it a corrections department or marshals, which will come under the judges, then we'll have to do it that way if it's more effective.
Did you have any opinion about the way in which Dick Hongisto ran the sheriff's department? And I think the question is relevant because the chances are good that his successor will run it the same way. At least there was a pattern set up.
If Mr. Denman is chosen, I'm sure it would be pretty much the same way. Sheriff Hongisto has a lot of political opinions that are different than mine, but I think many of his ideas were very good ideas, and there was a very real and sincere concern for the prisoners and for making, which he did. He made the sheriff's department from a non-entity into something that was very, very effective. So a lot of his programs were very good. We're at political odds, on many issues, but I have to respect many of the programs that he implemented.
One of the problems that seems to be unique in your district rather than being citywide is the question of whether the convent of the Good Shepherd in your district will be converted into whatever it is now, into a center for treating disturbed teenagers. Before you were a supervisor, you were just a citizen, although I guess you were a supervisor-elect. You led the fight against this conversion. The issue is not settled yet. Is it still, you still intend to fight this?
Definitely so. It's pending. The issue, as you mentioned, is still pending. And the problem with this whole situation stems from the initial attempt by the youth campus to implement this program. Citizens of San Francisco have been receiving a slanted view of what has occurred out there. And I'd just like to say, if I can shed any light on what happened, was so the people of San Francisco can put themselves in the people of the Portola district's position. Youth campus initially deceived the people in the Portola district as to what type of program was going in there. They continually passed out literature and made public statements that the same program that the Good Shepherd nuns had run for 40 years was just going to be continued with the inclusion of boys. Well, this was not the case. The Good Shepherd nuns never handled chronic arsonists, pathological sex offenders, and I'm quoting from the initial proposal by Youth Campus. These were the people. Erratic behavior, erratic emotional behavior, violent offenders would be installed out there. And once the people found this out, obviously they resented it, that they were lied to, that there was an attempt to deceive them. And this is why the reaction was so strong. Now, we're not talking about 50 people or 100 people. We're talking of petitions that have been signed that total almost 2,000 people, see. And then that's an awful lot of people in a district to, you know, oppose something.
But those people were voted down by the last Board of Supervisors. Now it'll come up again.
Now, let me correct that, Jerry. The Board of Supervisors twice now, 2 months in a row, denied Youth Campus the contract.
Oh,
Twice.
okay. It was
They were overridden by the mayor. See, the mayor vetoed. Initially, this is very confusing because there's two parts of it. The first part is the site as an approval for Youth Campus. The second is the contract approval. Now, both were denied on a 6-to-5 vote twice. The mayor vetoed the site approval, in other words, allowing the site to be utilized by Youth Campus, yet he did not veto the contract, so the contract was void. So what we have is an approval of the site, but Youth Campus cannot move in. Now Youth Campus is presenting another proposal, which will come before the Mental Health and Environment Committee at the end of this month. Then it would be sent to the full board for a vote. So possibly within a month and a half, the full board will vote on it again. And whatever happens, it'll go before the mayor.
Do you expect to defeat it again?
Yes.
Even with a district system where you have only one supervisor, Dan White, who is involved in the community in which this is taking place, and 10 others who presumably could care less.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the other 10 others you speak of are very interested in the facts. The facts, I was not in a position as Dan White citizen to present the facts to the board members as I am now. And when they find out that there was a lot of deception used, there were false statements made, and a thing that I will not go into now, which I think is a deciding factor, is in who's going to own that property. See.
Well, I think you would agree there ought to be some institution or facility to treat disturbed teenagers.
I agree wholeheartedly.
If not in the Portola, which some call Portola, but I guess that's a local pronunciation of Portola, where should it be?
Well, they said there aren't any alternative sites. Yet there was a convalescent home that was offered to the city on 30th Street. It was a hospital, psychiatric hospital, was offered to the city, which the city showed no interest in buying, purchasing at a very, very low price, which could house, I think at the time, there were over 100 people. You have, on the psychiatric section of the San Francisco General Hospital, I received a letter approximately 2 weeks ago from the head doctor out there that stated there's over 90 beds that are on a 24-hour availability basis that are going unused. You see, you have the Laguna Honda hospital wing. There's a major wing of that hospital that is not being used. See, but this wasn't brought out.
What's the difference between those facilities and the convent facility, other than the fact that those are outside of your district?
You mean is
why are they better than the convent?
Well, the thing is, the proponents, which I haven't been convinced of, the proponents of the proposal state that they want the teenagers in San Francisco. Okay. If we agree with them, you know, if I now look with a favorable eye on their position for a minute, then what we have to do, I feel, is figure the best location that does not alienate a neighborhood. You know, when you consider you're going to have over 1,000 residents opposing a program, how is that, and valid reasons to oppose it, see, because of deception.
But won't the residents oppose it anywhere it goes? The portal of residents are no different from anyone else. Nobody likes facilities like that in their neighborhood.
Well, I personally don't feel it belongs in anybody's neighborhood, okay? But
so what do you want to do, put the kids on Alcatraz?
No. There's a property, you know, like down in Redwood City now, the Hassler Hospital, that's 260 acres, that is being offered for the same price that the Good Shepherd home is being offered. But let's say we have to locate, you know, like I say, I look with a favorable eye on the proponents of the Good Shepherd, of the youth campus proposal. Let's take for granted that we should locate in San Francisco. Now, this is what I've been investigating. Why turn down the availability of public facilities when these people who are private citizens that make up the Youth Campus Board who are not putting one nickel of their own money, and they are getting 12 acres of prime San Francisco land, which they will have the total say over what happens to that land. If a year from now they want to phase out that facility and sell that property, they're the sole owners of that property. I think that's
not city property now, though, is it?
No.
It belongs to
private property.
the religious order that owns it.
Right. But let's understand that your money, your tax dollars, my tax dollars, the thousands of people who oppose its tax dollars in the Portola are paying for that facility. And yet that facility will not be owned by the city, will not be owned by the state, will be owned by private citizens. And it's worth millions of dollars. And I feel this has not been brought out, and I intend to bring it out. To further that, what I'm saying is, why allow for the possibility, which I think is a motivation behind some of the people on the Youth Campus Board, for financial gain? Why allow that when, if you want to put it in the city, let's utilize city facilities that are already there, you see, that the city owns. That's what I'm saying. Because I am very, very convinced that there are motivations other than the kindness and the goodness to further mankind behind this proposal.
I'm sure we'll hear considerably more about this proposal before that issue's over. In the remaining minute and a half or thereabouts, let me ask you quickly a couple of other things.
Is that quickly? We have such a
Amazing how
grand
time's
time
flying. You drew a 4-year term in the luck of the draw.
Right, I did.
Do you intend to, at this time, can you tell whether you intend to make a career out of this? Do you intend to go for another term when this one's over?
No, I really can't say. The goals that I want to achieve, and this is where I feel, I'm glad I have the opportunity to state this, I feel a person who is dedicated and interested and devotes the time can go down to City Hall and learn the mechanics of being a supervisor and voting on issues using common sense and concern for the city. But if there are any real changes to be brought about in San Francisco, and I feel they're desperately needed, changes of direction for this city, it rests on the shoulders of the people of San Francisco. My job is to educate the voters in my district so they are voting for the people that they want to represent them. This is not the case. They complain about the schools, yet they cannot name who sits on their elected school board. See, that's my job, to educate those voters so they are voting as a group of thousands and thousands of people voting to change what happens in San Francisco.
In one quick sentence, would you ever seek any other office or not?
At this time, I couldn't answer that. I'm finding it very interesting and absorbing of all my time to be a supervisor.
Supervisor, we'll watch your career with great interest in the years and months to come.
Well, thank you, Jerry.
We thank you for joining us.
Very enjoyable.
Our guest tonight on Viewpoint has been Supervisor Dan White. We appreciate your joining us, too, and we hope you'll join us again next week. Thank you. Good night.
This has been Viewpoint Dan White, the 22nd program in our series designed to help you become more informed on the viewpoints of your community leaders. The opinions expressed on Viewpoint are those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the policies of Viacom Cablevision or the opinions of its management or employees. Viewpoint Dan White has been presented in the public interest by Viacom Cablevision of San Francisco.